Good day, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank the Honors Program at Henry Ford College in Dearborn, Michigan for this opportunity to present to you a topic that has been of great interest to me for many years. First off, I don't want you to be put off by all the chemical structures on the first slide. As an organic chemist, they are fascinating to me, but I know that I am in a very minute minority with this fascination. There will be very little chemistry in today's talk, although it is about a chemist. Today's presentation is going to be in two parts. In the first part, I will take you on a guided tour of the life of Fritz Haber, both professional and personal. At most times in his adult life, there is no separating professional from personal. In the second part, I will be playing a clip from the NPR show Radiolab, along with a slide presentation that I have prepared. I'm a fan of this show and recommend that you all check it out at radiolab.org. They consistently provide a unique and creative experience in linking science to real life. In 1868, Fritz Haber is born in Breslau, Silesia, Germany, now Wrocław, pronounced Wrocław, Poland. People at the time there considered themselves Silesians, Prussians, or Bavarians. Paula Haber dies of complications from childbirth 3 weeks after giving birth to Fritz. Unrelated, Kaiserreich is established shortly thereafter. This is the period of time where most of the countries surrounding what we know as Germany today were under monarchical control, ruled over by a Kaiser. Fritz attends Johanneum School, which is quite liberal and open to all religions. He first notices tension between Christians and Jews, even though it is not institutional. Fritz then attends Elizabeth High School. It is more oriented towards humanities and much stricter. He joins an anti-classic circle and associates with the college academic literary club. In 1886, he graduates from St. Elizabeth High School. After Uncle Hermann intervenes with his father on Fritz's behalf, he attends Friedrich Wilhelm University in Berlin, the Institute for Chemistry. There he meets and befriends Richard Abege, who will become one of his lifelong friends. Haber switches to Heidelberg University for the summer semester after being attracted there by Robert Bunsen. Haber is not a fan of Bunsen, but was influenced strongly by him. He broadens his education further beyond science. At this time, Wilhelm II, grandson of England's Queen Victoria, ascends to the throne. He begins to alienate France, Russia, and Great Britain with aggressive speeches and military posturing. Haber switches to Charlottenburg University in Berlin. There he drags through his classes in a grind. He then does his 1 year of military service with the 6th Field Artillery Regiment. 3 years is normal for non-university students. Haber attends lectures during training. He adopts a military manner from then on. In 1889, Fritz meets Clara Immerwahr while dancing. She later moves on to study chemistry at the University of Breslau and becomes one of the first women to obtain a PhD in chemistry. She studies under the mentorship of Haber's friend, Richard Abege. Ricard. Fritz enjoys continuing in the academic literacy circle, or club, during evenings. After going back to the Charlottenburg Institute, Haber studies under Karl Liebermann, he of the alizarin dye synthesis. Liebermann succeeded Eugen Bayer, not to be confused with the aspirin guy. Haber develops a broad understanding of organic chemistry at this time. Fritz obtains a doctorate from Friedrich Wilhelm University for work on piperonal, an important intermediate used in the synthesis of indigo, as well as a flavoring and fragrance agent. Richard Abege receives his doctorate at the same time. Begrudgingly, Fritz goes back to Breslau to work with his father in the dye industry. His initial anxiety eventually yields to fruitful apprenticeships in many industrial chemical settings which follow, including distillery, soda ash, and cellulosic textile factories. In 1892, Haber begins studies at the Polytechnic College in Zurich to further his knowledge of the technical aspects of chemistry. Einstein is at the institute at this time, but they do not cross paths until later. At the college, George Lunge was a very positive influence in Haber becoming a team player. After a rocky turn helping his father with his business, academia is finally seen as the young Haber's future. Later in 1892, Fritz returns to Breslau, where his contacts in the Academic Literacy Club have led to contacts at the University of Jena. Haber matriculates from Jena after working with Ludwig Knorr as a research assistant. He develops a strong interest in physical chemistry. At this time, he also becomes baptized as a Lutheran. Haber had never been an observant Jew, but he undoubtedly sensed that some of his difficulties in obtaining higher success were no doubt due to his Jewish ancestry and the growing underlying anti-Semitic sentiments in Germany. In 1894, Haber travels to Karlsruhe, Germany, where he would remain for 17 years and become a mostly self-taught physical chemist. The Karlsruhe Institute of Technology would soon house the new Badische Anillen- und Sodafabrik, BASF, company. At this time, Haber teaches dye technology, gas chemistry, electrochemistry, and researchers under Hans Bunte. Haber's collaborations provide a foundation that will serve him well later in his career. In 1896, Hans Lugen, noted physical chemist, begins work at Karlsruhe and takes Haber under his wing. They become strong friends until Lugen's death in 1899. After Haber receives an associate professor status at the Institute of Technology at Karlsruhe, he has achieved one of his career objectives. His longtime goal, however, has not yet been reached. In 1901, Haber marries Clara Immerwahr, who had received her doctorate in chemistry under Haber's friend Richard Abege in 1900. Haber is frustrated after Max Leblanc is the first named professor and director of the Institute of Physical Chemistry at Karlsruhe. Haber redoubles his work, and his newfound family life suffers. Until 1903, Clara Haber attends seminars at the Chemical Society at Karlsruhe. She gives lectures on chemistry and physics in the household. In June 1902, Hermann is born. He is named after Fritz's uncle, who encouraged him to pursue chemistry and literature in his youth, much to his father's chagrin. Clara takes her maternal duties very seriously. Fritz has an annoying habit of inviting colleagues over for research discussions without giving his wife notice. The colleagues view these meetings as some of the most fruitful in their careers, while Clara becomes increasingly alienated and frustrated. Her career is now secondary to her husband's. In July of 1902, Haber is sent on a trip to America to learn about recent developments in electrochemical plants. He goes to the conference of the American Electrochemical Society in Niagara Falls. He also sees nitrogen fixation by electric arc while in Niagara Falls. He undergoes a 3-month trip across the USA, visiting electrochemical facilities. Haber is approached by the Austrian Chemical Works to explore fixation of nitrogen by equilibrium with hydrogen. This is a profound period in the professional career of Dr. Haber. In 1903, unknown to Haber, Ostwald abandoned claims to patenting his nitrogen fixation. This reaction is depicted at the bottom of the screen. Ostwald gave up on the fixation reaction because he held a belief that the technology could never be developed for it to work. Haber abandons his own fixation of nitrogen process due to poor research results as well. Ostwald retires from Leipzig and is replaced by Max Leblanc. Haber succeeds Leblanc as full professor at physical chemistry at Karlsruhe. Another of his lifelong ambitions is now realized. At the same time, Haber's book on thermodynamics unifies many contested theories, and the 1908 translation to English was hailed by Lewis and Randall as a model of accuracy and critical insight. Between 1906 and 1909, Haber's work in the Physical Chemistry Institute includes electron emission, amalgams, and interferometer design for gas analysis. Two key members of his team were lab assistant Friedrich Kirschenbauer and Robert Le Rossignol. Haber oversees a multinational group including British, American, European, and Japanese at Karlsruhe. Walter Nernst's nitrogen fixation research refutes previously published data by Haber. Nernst's first impression of Haber is that he is too confident of himself for a man who has yet to accomplish much. Haber doggedly returns to the lab to get more accurate data. Haber's new data leads Nernst to abandon this research altogether. In 1908, Haber signs a contract with BASF to share all work and research related to the fixation of nitrogen using electric arc or other technology. One early conclusion was that the electric arc process is only feasible with cheap electricity. This is not a strong point for Germany at the time. On the fixation front, an osmium catalyst allowed the ammonia synthesis reaction to be lowered to 550 degrees Celsius and 175 atmospheres of pressure, achieving an 8% ammonia at equilibrium. These were promising results. As outlined on the slide, you can also see that there were several problems that still needed to be overcome before the Haber-Bosch process would be feasible. After developing a reactor that could withstand both the very high temperatures and high pressures, as well as a special cooling device, ammonia began to drip from his apparatus. None of this would have been able to be possible without the technical skills of Haber's assistants, Le Rossignol and Kirschenbauer. These early results were reported to BASF. BASF was skeptical because the technology for such high pressures and temperatures at an industrial scale did not currently exist. In 1909, Karl Bosch intervenes, thinking these technical difficulties can be overcome. There's a demonstration scheduled for BASF, but a hiccup with a failed seal occurs. Bosch leaves, and his assistant, Alvin Mitosch, aids in the fix. The second demonstration succeeds, and assistant Mitosch reports ecstatically to Bosch. In 1909, Haber finally meets Albert Einstein at a scientific congress in Karlsruhe, and they become lifelong friends, even though they have different views on nationalism. Sadly, with all of Fritz's success, it is at this time that his wife is feeling lost. Clara wrote to her friend, "What Fritz has gained these 8 years, that, and even more, I have lost, and what is left of me fills me with the deepest dissatisfaction." In 1910, Haber announces to the Scientific Union that it is now practical to synthesize ammonia from its elements on an industrial scale. This bombshell announcement changes history. The discovery is hailed as now being able to make bread from air. Mitosch finds that an impure iron catalyst is superior, and it is a lot cheaper than the original osmium catalysts. To date, a better catalyst has yet to be found. The Bosch lab was producing 400 kilograms of ammonia per day. There were difficulties with breakdowns and hydrogen fire eruptions. Bosch and his team would eventually work out these kinks so the process could eventually become industrialized. George Bredig succeeds Haber at Haber's bequest in Karlsruhe. Haber's ultimate dream is soon to be realized. In 1911, Emil Fischer coaxes Haber to join the Institute for Physical and Electrochemistry. This is later to be called the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, or KWI. After Haber's tenure concluded, it became known as the Max Planck Institute and is now the Haber Institute in Berlin. This will prove to be the most rewarding collaborative endeavor for Haber and dozens of other scientists who are on or will be on the KWI team. In 1911, Haber convinces Emil Fischer to lure his good friend and future Nobel laureate, Richard Willstatter, to the Institute. Haber's former antagonist, Nernst, defends Haber in a patent nullity suit by the Höchst Die Works. Nernst's claim is that without Haber's research, his own personal original claims of the possibility of the ammonia synthesis would never have been realized. The suit against Haber and Le Rossignol is dropped in part because of this favorable testimony. Haber makes a big push to lure Einstein to the Wilhelm Institute in Berlin. In 1913, Bosch turns to a carbon-free steel alloy with vents to resolve issues that allow the first ammonia production plant in Oppau, near Ludwigshafen. Haber moves into his villa near the KWI in Berlin. Richard Willstatter builds his house next door. In July 1914, World War I breaks out, and Haber cancels a planned 6-week vacation. Haber is appointed head of the chemistry section in the Ministry of War. Haber is one of the signers of the Proclamation to the Civilized World, which attempts to justify Germany's engagement in war. Walter Rathenau heads the Board of Wartime Raw Materials and places Haber as head of the chemistry department. Haber and Fischer head a commission to deal with limited supplies of nitrates, which are used in the manufacture of explosives. Einstein and George Nicolai write a manifesto to the Europeans as a rebuttal to Haber et al.'s proclamation of the 93, illustrated on the slide. Shortly after, Haber and Rathenau have a falling out. Haber leaves the board, but continues his ammonia work. But now that work is towards the war effort. Nernst reacts positively to the new idea of chemical warfare. The Bayer Company manufactures nightshells filled with dianisodine chlorosulfonate. Haber sees only limited potential in this weapon due to the poor range of poisoning per shell. The shells are tried in one battle, and the enemy was not even aware they were under a chemical attack. Haber then took charge of technical preparation for the use of chlorine gas using 20-kilogram cylinders. Members of Haber's chemical warfare team include Otto Hahn, James Franck, Hans Geiger, and many others who would lead very important scientific careers in the future. Haber, Hahn, and Franck would all be future Nobel laureates, but not for these endeavors. The age of chemical warfare was begun. Fair or not, FritzHaber will always be considered one of the fathers of this form of war on its 100th anniversary in 2015. As a patriotic German, he was concerned that the new form of trench warfare introduced in World War I would create a stalemate that Germany could not survive. His motivation was to break the trenches by chemical means to assure German victory. On April 22, 1915, at 6 p.m. in Langemarck near Ypres, Belgium, A chlorine gas attack was unleashed after waiting many days for a favorable weather report. The attack tears open 6 kilometers of the front, and the town is taken. A lack of post-attack planning allows Allies to retake the area later. It is estimated that there were 7,000 victims with 350 dead. At this time, Haber was promoted by the Kaiser to rank of captain. Following is an account from a German soldier, Willy Siebert, who was there. The weatherman was right. It was a beautiful day. The sun was shining. We should have been going on a picnic, not doing what we were going to do. We sent the German infantry back and opened the gas valves with the strings. About supper time, the gas started towards the French. Everything was stone quiet. We all wondered what was going to happen. As this great cloud of gray-green gas was forming in front of us, we suddenly heard the French yelling. In less than a minute, they started with the most rifle and machine gun fire that I had ever heard. Every field artillery gun, every machine gun, every rifle that the French had must have been firing. I had never heard such a noise. The hail of bullets going over our heads was unbelievable, but it was not stopping the gas. The wind kept moving the gas towards the French lines. We heard the cows bawling and the horses screaming. The French kept on shooting. They couldn't possibly see what they were shooting at. In about 15 minutes, the gunfire started to quit. After half an hour, only occasional shots. Then everything was quiet again. In a while, it had cleared, and we walked past the empty gas bottles. What we saw was total death. Nothing was alive. All of the animals had come out of their holes to die. Dead rabbits, moles, and rats and mice were everywhere. The smell of the gas was still in the air. It hung on the few bushes that were left. When we got to the French lines, the trenches were empty, but in a half mile the bodies of the French soldiers were everywhere. It was unbelievable. Then we saw there were some English. You could see where men had clawed at their faces and throats trying to get breath. Some had shot themselves. The horses, still in the stables, cows, chickens, everything, all were dead. Everything, even the insects, were dead. The following is from a Canadian soldier, A.T. Hunter, who witnessed the attack from the other side. The French troops saw none of this installation of premeditated murder. Looking across to the German trenches at about 5 in the afternoon, they saw a series of sharp puffs of white smoke, and then trundling along with the wind, the queer greenish-yellow fog that seemed strangely out of place in the bright atmosphere of that clear April day. It reached the parapet, paused, gathered itself like a wave, and ponderously lapped over into the trenches. Then, passive curiosity turned to active torment, a burning sensation in the head, red-hot needles in the lungs, the throat seized as if by a strangler. Many fell and died on the spot. The others, grasping, stumbling, with faces contorted, hands wildly gesticulating, and uttering hoarse cries of pain, fled madly through the villages and farms and through Ypres itself, carrying panic to the remnants of the civilian population, and filling the roads with fugitives of both sexes and all ages. On May 1, 1915, there was a reception at the Haber residence. Afterwards, when the guests were gone, following a test shot, Clara Haber shoots herself in the heart with Fritz Haber's service revolver. Her man, 12, finds her still alive for 20 minutes. It should be noted that before her death, she had written several farewells. Unfortunately, paper copies have not survived, but several of her friends and relatives have given testimonials. Some dispute about dates, May 2nd or May 4th, are when Haber leaves for the Eastern Front on orders. At the time, it seems inconceivable that he would leave. Later, he shows grief, and still later, he begins to show greater love for Hermann. Haber pushes forth on his research of chemical warfare. All aspects of this field are in his purview. The Ministry of War now completely funds the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute. All research is now directed towards advancing the war. In 1916, an ammonia plant construction begins in Luna towards nitrates for explosives. Gas-filling plants for phosgene and chloropicrin are active under Haber's command. Thinking towards the future and the impending end of the war, a report made at the Entomological Society in Munich describes problems of using hydrogen cyanide in barracks and quarters, hospitals, trains, etc. Suggestions for improvements on delivery methods and levels used, as well as detection and protective devices, are made at the meeting. Also, the effects of hydrogen cyanide and other gases on metals, dyes, plants, fungi, bacteria are reported. At a 1916 meeting in the former Room of War Chemicals Incorporated, included discussions of research into pest control, including the use of hydrogen cyanide. Haber sees this pesticide work as a way to continue chemical warfare research in the future if the war ends poorly. The Technical Committee for Pest Control, TASH, is formed as a result. Haber is named the chairman. Hydrogen cyanide used to eradicate pests and rodents in granaries, mills, military quarters is highly successful. Hygiene for Germany improves as a result. At the same time, a mustard gas-filling plant is completed in Brilo. The gas is used extensively in offense and later in defense as the war turns against Germany. In 1917, the Luna plant begins making ammonia, with 36,000 metric tons being produced near Merseburg. In October of 1917, Fritz marries Charlotte Nathan. She is more light-hearted and free-spirited than Clara was. In July of 1918, Eva Charlotte Haber is born to Fritz and Charlotte. Charlotte requests a trip to help her overcome post-delivery exhaustion. Fritz, already on such a trip, subtract the delivery of a child, denies the request. Charlotte is not pleased, as anyone would not be. In 1918, pest control is transferred to a new private company, German Corp for Pest Control, or DGESH. The company's statutes include: the object of the company's existence is the control of animal and plant pests using chemical means. The company is permitted to carry out all transactions suitable for promoting the company's purpose. Operation of the company is not directed toward profit. Rather, the company is to follow exclusively a course directed toward the public good. In 1918, Haber is placed on a list of wartime criminals. He moves to Switzerland and obtains citizenship. The French had captured unexploded shells, and by November had filled 2.8 million shells of their own with chemical weapons. Fortunately, an armistice halts new research. Unfortunately, however, military planning for future gas warfare does not cease. In 1919, Haber's name is removed from the wartime criminal list. Extradition orders are rescinded, and Haber moves back to Berlin. Haber is awarded the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for his work on nitrogen fixation. Haber resigns his position in the National Office for Economic Demobilization to resume research at the KWI. Fritz Haber accepts the Nobel Prize. He and Charlotte vacation in Norway and Sweden. Concurrently, Haber works with Hugo Stolzenberg to comply with allies in destroying or repurposing and transportation of chemical warfare agents. In order to perhaps help Germany meet war reparations, Haber, based on early research by Svante Arrhenius, that there may be 6 milligrams of gold per metric ton of ocean water. He believes it might be feasible to extract gold from the oceans. At this time, the Emergency Association of German Science is formed. Haber and Friedrich Schmidt-Ott are key players. Their main mission? Promote the sciences to the public. Also, Haber lectures on the chemistry of war to officers of the German Ministry of Defense. Haber is still a proponent of chemical weapons. Stolzenberg consults with several countries including Finland, Sweden, and Spain about establishing chemical warfare research. Stolzenberg guides Spanish officers on tours in Germany, and a contractual agreement is reached. He begins work in Spain. Deliveries of chemical warfare agents with Spain continues into 1923. Haber continues to inform the German army of Stolzenberg's progress. Haber is informed in discussions with the Soviet Union about establishing chemical warfare research facilities in Russia. Stolzenberg visits the Soviet Union and prepares a report. Access to warfare agents is to be as free to Germany as it is to the Red Army. In 1923, Haber testifies to a subcommittee on World War I chemical warfare. He states the French were the first to use chemical warfare and that chemical warfare was just another tactic. The committee accepts Haber's testimony. In 1924, Haber attends the First World Power Conference in London. Trips with Charlotte continue into 1925 by way of California, Japan, Korea, Singapore, Manchuria, Shanghai, Hong Kong, Indonesia, Ceylon, and Egypt. Sadly, back home, after anti-Semitic incidents, Richard Wilstatter, Haber's close friend and 1915 Nobel Prize recipient in chemistry, resigns his teaching duties in Berlin at the KWI. At this time, de Gesche develops a process for controlled release of hydrogen cyanide using Zyklon B. This becomes a very profitable product for pest control. In 1925, Haber's son, Hermann, receives a doctorate in chemistry. This is remarkable in that his true interests lie in law. James Franck, head of physics in Haber's institute, wins the Nobel Prize for his work on atomic theory. Franck says, on Haber, "I would see a keyhole somewhere, and Haber would open the door." Hermann marries Margarethe Stern, a daughter of Fritz's friend, Rudolf Stern, after both men originally object because Margarethe has a history of depression. Despite serious financial hardships, Haber's institute is scientifically fruitful from 1926 to 33. Herbert Freundlich, colloid chemistry, Michael Polanyi, flames and explosions as well as polymerization mechanisms and elasticity of solids, Carl Friedrich Bonhoeffer, hydrogen atoms, Rudolf Ladenburg, electricity to purify gases, magnetic rotation of plane polarization, which was the precursor to the invention of the laser, Hartmut Kalman, ionization of gases and acceleration, the precursor to modern mass spectroscopy, and Paul Hartek for his work on hydrogen and oxygen atoms. In 1926, Hermann and wife are in Washington, D.C., where he works with a patent attorney, finally putting his law interests to work. Haber makes his Seagold research public and admits failure. His research proved to be much lower than the erroneous Arrhenius results, where there were only 0.008 of a milligram of gold per metric ton of seawater. In 1927, Haber withdraws from active participation in production of chemical warfare agents. Until 1933, he still participated in secret activities. Marital woes continued as Charlotte extends her recovery from influenza in Switzerland. Fritz and Charlotte separate. They divorce on December 6. Haber, after wavering in his pushing his son towards chemistry, gets him a job in the International Chamber of Commerce in Paris. This is a short tenure after Hermann becomes disillusioned by authoritarian structure. In 1928, Haber takes Hermann and Margarethe into his home. Claire is born there in December. Hermann begins work at Aussiger Verein and works there until 1931. In 1930, a second grandchild is born, Agnes. Haber gives his son a considerable amount of stocks. Hermann starts work in Alsace, France, in the Company for Chemical Products from the Rare Earths. He works there until 1941. In 1933, Hermann's relationship to his father remains very close until Fritz's death. Kurt Hahn, the schoolmaster at Haber's grandchildren Lutz's and Eva's school in Salem, southwest Germany, is arrested. Why is he arrested? It is because he is a Jew working in public service. Einstein condemns the German cruelties towards the Jews, calling for a moral intervention against the excesses of Hitlerism. Haber at first agrees with Einstein's expulsion from the Prussian Academy of Sciences. By September, his views have clearly changed. In a letter to Einstein, "I was never in my life as Jewish as now, after German scientists are subjected to racial laws regarding employment and public service." Einstein hands his passport to the German embassy in Belgium and heads to Princeton for the remaining 22 years of his life. Hermann does his best to help Fritz's Jewish co-workers escape Germany. Haber himself had been working tirelessly for his co-workers to find employment outside of Germany. Without consulting Charlotte, Fritz wants to move Eva and Lutz to Britain. She eventually capitulates and moves there with the children, who eventually become British citizens. Haber, whose health has always been weak enough to require multiple convalescences at sanatorium for stress and exhaustion, is now suffering from what we would now call chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder, and he leaves Berlin to first go to Paris to see his friend Wilstatter. Haber's remaining days are helped by the Englishmen Hartley and Pope, and the Frenchman Henri Marur, who had all been former adversaries in chemical warfare during World War I. Haber seeks recuperation in Switzerland, but then travels to Weissmann in Zermatt, which is at an altitude of 1,500 meters. He discusses traveling to Palestine. He suffers what was likely a heart attack and then checks into a Swiss sanatorium in Mamern, near Lake Constance. He remains there until October 1933. Hartley has secured a lab position for Haber in Cambridge, England, and sends an invite to him. Pope helps getting the lab prepared for Haber's arrival, and he also ensures financial assistance. Haber leaves for Paris to see his son. He stays a few days and then heads for Cambridge. Haber's stay in Cambridge only lasts 2 months. Moods and emotions cause him grief. In December, there are some moments of comfort when he is visited by former colleagues from Berlin. Haber reports to his friend, Dr. Rudolf Stern, that he had another heart attack in his hotel, smaller than previous. His sister, Else Friedhan, tries to convince Haber to go south to Portugal to avoid the harsh English winter, but he stays until the end of January. The Third Reich is established in Germany, and Haber's mental and physical states plummet. His coronary heart disease requires frequent convalescence. Haber leaves Cambridge in January 1934 after only 2 months. He travels to Basel with his sister. Hermann and Rudolf Stern await him in Switzerland. The evening of his arrival, he suffers a heart event and is never revived. All members of the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute were forbidden from attending Fritz Haber's memorial service on January 29, 1934. Haber, after all, had Jewish ancestry. Still, the lovely reception room at the Harnack House was full. Karl Bosch had taken it upon himself to find all near or distant relatives of Haber's research team and invited them. Several of Haber's co-workers also showed up at their own risk. 7 months after his death, Haber's third grandchild, Marie Anne, was born. In 1941, SS experiments were conducted at Auschwitz I on 600 Soviet prisoners of war and 250 sick prisoners using a form of Zyklon B, which was formulated by Haber's Degesch Corporation in 1924. The experiment, sadly, was a success. In 1942, gas showers at Auschwitz-Birkenau created, and Zyklon B was used without the warning odor chemical present to exterminate 2,000 Jews at a time. The prisoners were led to believe that they were going for a shower. In 1943, among Haber's relatives killed using the Zyklon process were the daughter of his half-sister Frieda, Hilde Glucksmann, and her husband, and their 2 children. As a footnote, in 1941, after World War II was declared, Hermann joined the French Foreign Legion after failing to obtain French citizenship. He was devastated by this. In 1942, after Germany invaded France, Hermann and family headed to the Caribbean on a French ship. He tried to obtain an American visa. Eventually, he succeeded after some frustration. In 1945, Hermann's wife Margarethe died of cancer. In 1946, Hermann committed suicide. Several months later, Haber's third grandchild also committed suicide. In 1978, Charlotte Haber died in Basel, where Fritz died approximately 40 years previously. Stay tuned for part 2 of this. It will be the Radiolab portion. I hope you found this informative.